Well, let's stay with that story now because inflation has turned negative. Prices falling for the first time since 1960. Figures out today show it dipped to minus 0.1% in the year to April. The Chancellor has denied that this is the beginning of a period of dangerous deflation, calling it good news for family budgets. Here's our economics editor, Robert Peston.
This skiffle classic was top of the charts in March 1960, the last time prices fell in Britain, and more than 70% of us weren't even born. For most of the post-war years, inflation was the British disease, but today the pressure on prices, especially for food, is downward.
We see the forces in the market continuing to stay, and as such it'll continue to be more and more competitive, meaning that we will have to continue to offer great prices every day.
Here's the history of British prices. A little bit of deflation 55 years ago, then decades of inflation, which was rampant in the 1970s, till today's big chill. Price rises on ice, the advent of deflation. What's the risk of the economy catching a cold? Well, it could happen if we decided to defer our spending in the hope of picking up bargains later. If our employers decided to pay us less, the economy slowed down and our big debts became harder to service. But right now, the danger of that looks reasonably slim. So these things are going a bit further than they did. And on the day that the Bank of England asked all of us for our nominations for an artist to be the face on the next issue of notes, the Governor warned us not to assume falling prices are the new norm.
To be clear, we expect inflation to be very low for the next several months. But over the course of the year, as we get towards the end, inflation should start to pick up towards our 2% target. The British people should enjoy this period of very low energy prices, very low food prices. Enjoy it while it lasts.
Much of the initial spur to deflation came from a collapse in the oil and fuel price, which has been partially reversed in recent weeks. And another source of lower prices was a fall in the price of imports from the Eurozone. That came from a drop in the value of the euro, which also may have ended.
Operation Bargain Hunter.
General price falls, deflation, lasted just 3 months in 1960, and maybe even shorter-lived today. Robert Peston, BBC News.
And when we think about deflation, the impact can be best described in a cycle. Any way you slice it, deflation is caused by a significant drop in demand. Less demand means producers, retailers and sellers of goods and services must lower their prices to entice buyers. Lower prices result in fewer jobs and salary reductions, and this in turn takes us back to a fall in demand. Well, with me now is Ben Southwood, who's head of research at Adam Smith Institute. That's a free market think tank. Ben, good evening.
Good evening.
You hear talk of good deflation and not so good deflation. So which is this?
This, I think, is good deflation. So you just gave a very good explanation of bad deflation. Good deflation is when we get better at doing things, or when stuff that we think we don't have very much of, we get lots more of it. So, for example, some good deflation we see in the technology sector. Prices keep going down and down and down. That doesn't lead to a spiral because we're getting better, we're getting more productive in that sector. Similarly, if we import lots of oil like we do, when oil gets cheaper, because we think down the line there's more of it, that's good for us. It means that everything gets cheaper, but it's not because there's not enough demand in the economy. It's just because we're getting better at making things.
There was talk as well, on today's figures specifically, of air travel, sea travel prices coming down as well.
Great things. I suspect generally what we see with good deflation is you have downward spikes in a few particular sectors, particularly ones travel is what we're seeing here, and then you average them out and that looks like deflation overall. Bad deflation is when everything's going down a little bit because everyone's cutting back in, across all the areas they buy across, rather than just the spikes that we see in good deflation. Another sign that this is good deflation is that we've got employment rising, we've got wages, real wages rising, and we've got output rising. You never see that with a bad deflation. If you look at Greece, obviously the exact opposite of those three. Unemployment is 25%, and so on.
So the implication of what you're saying is that we're not going to see these negative figures for very long?
No. As Mark Carney says, right now these are an unalloyed good. They're for consumers, they make everyone richer. Within the next year or 2 years, I expect with Mark Carney that inflation will go back towards the 2% target.
which of course is what he ultimately has to hit, because of course
Yeah.
every time we go to minus something he has to write a letter and explain why we're there.
Exactly, yeah.
Is there anything that government can do or needs to do in this specific situation to change it, or if it's good, do they just sit back and say that we're doing all right?
Well, thankfully, since 1997, the government has left most of the macroeconomic management, inflation, targeting and so on, to the Bank of England. I think that's their job. In certain rare situations when interest rates hit zero, when the QE program is maxed out, then maybe you need fiscal policy. But right now, this looks like it's a transitory factor. If you remember, during the crisis and the slow recovery, we had inflation above target for about 5 years. It hit 5.2% twice. The Bank of England rightly said that lots of this is coming from one-off temporary factors, higher fuel prices, higher food prices from abroad. It didn't respond to those because you shouldn't respond with monetary policy to temporary factors.
And just a final thought on consumer behaviour here. As a result of these figures being widely publicised, as they have been today, would you anticipate any change in consumer behaviour? What do people tend to do in this situation?
I don't think you'd see any change in consumer behaviour. I mean, maybe even, because with this is good deflation, maybe even more purchases. When you see bad deflation, people cut back because they want to...
Because they wait for the prices to fall still further.
But when you see good deflation, that doesn't happen.
Okay. Ben, thank you very much for coming in. Ben Southwood there from the